This season was a bit hard for me to review, since aside from all the stuff that was going on, such as ReZero Season 3, Dandadan, and Dragon Ball Daima, to name a few, this season had a lot of highs and a lot of lows. So I'll have to dive into this review through sections, the arcs essentially, just to be able to divide things better, as well as my thoughts on the matter of each arc. That being Star and Stripes arc, the Traitor Reveal / Calm Before the Storm type arc, and the Final War arc, with, funnily enough, the Final War arc being divided into subsections of things that happen there, because so much happens there. Now, the purpose is to tell my thoughts, of course, on the matter with a little bit of revision on what had happened on said arcs, so that way it's like organized in a sense. But let us begin. Funnily enough, this was funny to watch the community losing their ever-living minds when we only had 2 episodes of one of the most overpowered heroes in the My Hero Academia verse. And she got clapped by Shigaraki because he had such crazy plot armor that it's actually pretty funny when you see the villain have plot armor. That, and imagine if she did beat All For One and / Shigaraki. That would have been the funniest way to have ended the show, essentially. Anyway, the fight is pretty goated. Honestly, that goes with the visuals of this season. It was just beyond amazing. Now, on the whole thing of how All For One and Shigaraki were able to beat her, it's kinda BS. However, there is some explanation, since she had said Shigaraki, because her ability is essentially she can control the rules of whatever she names or touches, and it is a bit busted, but like I said, she said Shigaraki, and because he technically wasn't Shigaraki at the moment but was All For One, her ability didn't work for, very arbitrary reasons. If there's a good comparison to this, it would be the whole separation between Batman and Bruce Wayne, despite the two being the same person, even though in this case they're literally 2 beings in one body kind of way. It's fine, I guess. You could give it a 7 out of 10, because the visuals really do hold up, and Stars and Stripes is obviously a damn well amazing character, even though she only debuted for 2 episodes. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that matter. Now, for the Traitor Reveal and obviously the calm moments before obviously everything goes to shit. For the Traitor, I mean, the fact that it is Aoyama, I'm not really surprised, because it was a literally toss-up between him and Toru Hagakure, the invisible girl chick, because honestly, the two were on the back line of things. And I mean, if it was a teacher, I mean, a lot of people thought it was the principal. Like, this theory went on because of season 3, but well, when it was kind of revealed that there had to have been a traitor. But obviously, the fact that it was Aoyama is pretty interesting, especially when the whole he was born quirkless, similar to Deku, and how both their lives had been trajectored because of their respective person that they got the quirk from, is an interesting contrast. I think that's pretty cool of a contrast. And it's similar to how Deku was created to be the hero thanks to All Might, and how Shigaraki was essentially molded by All For One to become the ultimate villain. Now, granted, though, I mean, he was quirkless for a good while before his quirk kicked in, and obviously being, well, the juggernaut that it is. But obviously, it's just Aoyama. I think too many characters allowed him to essentially be forgiven too easily. Obviously, Bakugo makes sense. He got captured, and that whole arc he went through, it sucked for him. And I think Deku shouldn't have been as forgiving. I don't mind him being forgiving. He's a kind character. That's fine and all. But I think Aoyama was let off a little too easy. I get the teacher, though. I would get Aizawa. It's his responsibility to take care of his children. And obviously, he's cared enough as a teacher that he doesn't want his students to go the dark route. So I get it from him being a little more forgiving, even though his nature is a little not necessarily kind. But that's a different side note. Too many characters gave him, I mean, at the very least, I would think Invisible Girl really had, like, disdain towards him. Like, his reputation went down, but considering that he was useful for them to take on All For One, I think that's where you could say that they need him, and he could redeem himself. I don't think he's, like, far gone of unredeemable, but I do think that there's some things that could have been workshopped. And as for the calm before the storm, I think the only noteworthy thing is Deku and Ochaco's conversation in regards to the respective villains that they want to save. So it's kind of commendable that these two want to save Toga and Shigaraki, even though, I mean, Toga, there is a case, but Shigaraki, I mean, my dude, he is so far gone, I don't know what to say. So overall, I mean, 6 out of 10. Oh my god, for this final part, I literally went down to write this, derailing the review just for a second. There's 12 parts to this fucking thing. Yeah, I know, a pretty lot, because it's the core fights of literally the final arc on how they were able to trick All For One, and then they set up the trap that separates everyone. And honestly, this is going to be fun, so let's go over each part, because my golly, the final war is probably the most important part of this entire season. Let's go with literally my top favorite fight of the final war arc, Shoto versus Dabi. And I think this is quite telling that this is probably important for Shoto. Yes, it is told in last season that Shoto and Endeavor were going to take care of Dabi together. However, due to their circumstances on who the fuck is going to fight All For One, or who's enough to deal with him, it makes clear sense that Shoto has to at the very least handle Dabi, and that Endeavor's not necessarily ready to take on Dabi because his mental state is probably not going to be able to handle taking on his son, the one that he had not only thought he was dead, but completely neglected to hell, to the point where the dude literally self-destructed in order to try to get his father's attention. But to the fight. The fight obviously is visually amazing, and it shows on the two different sons that were broken by their fathers in different ways. However, the way they took it is different. Shoto had friends. He allowed people in, mainly Deku, who managed to break through that wall he had made, and he quite literally was able to start going into the path of forgiveness. Unlike Dabi, who, after having realized that, I mean, his family quite literally just did not care in his eyes, he kind of accepted that Toya is dead, and that Dabi was born right then and there, and that he wants to see Endeavor burned. And Shoto does acknowledge, there's an acknowledgement that if Shoto had kept going the path he was going before obviously the tournament arc, he more likely would have become Dabi. And it's pretty interesting seeing these two, the so-called perfect son and the failure son, facing each other, and how honestly it's pretty emotional, only because Shoto has to beat his older brother, someone he desperately wants to save as well. He doesn't want to kill him, but he also doesn't want to fight him. However, he knows that Dabi has to be stopped, and considering he made a literal ability to counter Dabi, and he was able to beat him, being the first hero to win their respective section, it is pretty genuine. Like, that's a great character arc. Now, put a pin on this, because another part will go on what I'm saying here. So let's move on to the next fight. Okay, so next part is going to be Ochaco and Tsuyu versus Toga. And there is a lot of kind of mixing here, because this is where Deku ended up, where he shouldn't, because Toga pulled him from his location to Toga's location, and it caused a bunch of shenanigans. But we're not here to talk about that just yet. What I want to talk about is just the fight between these two heroes against this villain, and how it's a lot to do with emotions for sure, because Toga, at the beginning of this little skirmish, they confessed to Deku, still loved Deku, and then when she was rejected, it sort of put her in a position of, okay, so no one loves me, so fuck you all, I'm gonna kill everyone kind of vibe. And obviously Ochaco had rejected her, quote unquote, back in season 6, so she was still angry with her. So Tsuyu is literally the only one that Toga has no real hatred towards, and it's pretty interesting. Though, I mean, the fighting is pretty cool. It's interesting how Toga did manage to be Tsuyu, so managed to trick Ochaco, though she used her form in order to save Tsuyu from being attacked by one of the Nomu, and it just shows that Toga's not fully evil. She is just like lashing out at the world because the world rejected her, so she rejects the world back, kind of thing. And yeah, even when, like, this is probably the only group that had the best chance at beating Toga and forcing her to use Twice's, like, blood in order to use Sadman's parade. Fortunately for her, some bullshit happens that allows her to kind of get away from here, which kind of postpones her defeat by Ochaco, because Ochaco's her main opponent, and this is about suppressing feelings, about letting things out, and stuff like that between these two. But we'll put a pin on this and move on to the next section for now. You'll understand why in a later section, but we'll put a pin on this right now. Okay, so for this section, I don't know how to approach this, but this is probably the one I kind of disliked, or maybe disliked is a strong word to put. I didn't enjoy as much, and it's not because of anything visually related. I think the action is pretty damn smooth for Shoji versus Spinner, Koji and his power up that he gets. Like, I believe all of this is pretty cool. However, when it comes down to the actual substance of this fight, it's the, what would you call, quirkism, racism arc, where the heteromorph quirks are obviously fighting for freedom and all that, basically the oppression stuff and all that fun jazz that I don't really want to go over. Like, I think this could have literally been a different arc. It could have had its own arc. And I only say that because Shoji's backstory is just that great. Even Koji, like how his mother was like bullied and that his father stepped in, kind of showing how badass he is. Like, stuff like that could have been developed within episodes, because it would have been more interesting to see a lot more of it. That is the thing I want to have clarified, because when I reviewed it, obviously I'm reviewing what the episode's showing. Well, after having had some amount of time to think about it, I think that this was missed potential. It could have had a lot more for us to digest, a lot more to show on it, a whole arc on it. We did see a little bit of it in the vigilante Deku stuff, but even then, that's not a lot, because that was just one incident that just so happens that she was just out at night doing her own thing, and for them it looked suspicious. But yeah, this was a missed opportunity. However, that comes down to that specific aspect of this fight. When it comes down to the flashbacks, Shoji and Koji have good flashbacks, and Spinner, oh my god, Spinners, it is sort of relatable, and unironically it makes you also want to root for him. So I wouldn't say this part was the worst, like the baddest thing ever. It's more that it could have done more with it, but what we got, it's like a 6 out of 10. Like, it's at least more than mid. It's in the okay category. Because let's be real, we definitely understand Spinner and his desire to help Shigaraki, not all for one, but Shigaraki, and how Shigaraki was literally his first real friend. So showing that strong connections. Something that I definitely enjoyed when we had My Villain Academia, with the villains kind of being like a genuine family of sorts. And yes, Spinner succeeding here caused a whole lot of dumb shit to happen, but you know what, I'll just say this, outside of that bullshit, I am happy that Spinner won. I genuinely was kind of rooting for him. I was rooting for Shoji because the flashback shows like he understands what it is like to be harassed, to be hated, and yet he overcame it by not becoming, well, a villain. Dabi. Anyway, not the point. I despise Dabi. Anyway, what it is that Spinner also had a strong motivation to help a friend. So a lot of it is definitely conflicting morals. But with Spinner winning, I don't feel like... I feel annoyed with what happens next, but I don't feel annoyed with Spinner winning. Like, the genuine concept of having a villain win. That is not my problem with it. And a lot of it was because Present Mike and Spinner were trying to reach their respective friend, which for Present Mike, it was Shirakumo. I think that's how you pronounce it. Shirakumo? Oboro Shirakumo. And for Spinner, it was trying to reach Kurogiri, which, I mean, that was kind of interesting in the sense of two people trying to reach sort of the same person. But then obviously in the end, Spinner wins. Now, as I said in the last part, and I'll say it in this part again, put a pin on this, because we still got a few more sections to go. This section, Endeavor and Hawks versus All for One. Now, knowing that Endeavor, being the number one hero, is quite literally the best possible chance at beating All for One, it makes sense to have him here. Hawks and Endeavor are like the greatest duo in the respective heroes that are fighting, so having those two fight against the literal boss of the villains is intriguing nonetheless. And seeing their teamwork works, as well as Endeavor and All for One being sort of a similar reflection of ambition and their obviously disdain towards All Might, though completely different reasons, as well as Endeavor doesn't despise All Might as much anymore. He probably gets annoyed with him here and there, but he's not as antagonistic like he was before. But his ambitions, like their ambitions to want to reach their goal, is similar. And that's intriguing because a hero and a villain being in a similar category is usually an interesting concept, as well as the fact that All for One does mention that whenever a hero is cornered, they are extremely dangerous. However, he does also point out when a villain is cornered, they are also extremely dangerous. So yeah, Endeavor and All for One are definitely the same coin, but from different sides, and only one side can be up at a time. Okay, so for this section, it is insanely big because it's obviously Bakugo's group and Bakugo himself versus Shigaraki. And obviously, Deku was supposed to be there, but he got yanked to a different section and was essentially being, like, gone for a few episodes, just flying in midair, trying to get to UA. And look, I will say this just to clarify everything. This isn't the anime's fault. This is the manga for doing this, but that's besides the point. The main point of this fight, it is kind of poetic. It definitely shows how strong Shigaraki has gotten, and as well as that Bakugo and his group could hold out on their own. It's not like they're fodder without Deku. However, due to Shigaraki's uniqueness, it is very annoying for them to actually be able to land an actual hit, with the exception of Bakugo. I think Bakugo kind of evolved here, and he stayed true to his character of I am never backing down even if it kills me kind of attitude. And it's one of the few times I can say I respect Bakugo for it. Like, Bakugo didn't stop. Like, he just kept going. He knew that he was probably outmatched, and Shigaraki was mocking him throughout this whole time, and yet he still remained standing up until the very end when he got, well, unalive. And I think it's something to commend him because he definitely stood his ground. He definitely upgraded enough to make the All for One within Shigaraki be afraid of him enough to view him as a genuine threat, and he was protecting everyone else as well. And despite how everyone else were giving it their all and they were doing amazing combos, amazing animation by the way, it was Bakugo who really made Shigaraki / All for One afraid. So if anything, Bakugo was the MVP before Deku arrived. Though I don't want to diss that Lemillion with his funny shenanigans actually also helped, since it distracted Shigaraki enough. Even if it was for a few seconds, it was a good enough distraction to get Deku there to land that blow, as well as being the literal counter to Shigaraki. However, the problem comes down to, although Shigaraki can't harm him, Lemillion also can't harm Shigaraki because he is not that strong to do that amount of damage, as well as be able to deal with the walls he can make of his flesh, the creepy ass flesh. So yeah, there was definitely problems of counter within counter, and then the other bullshit happens later on, but put a pin on it once again. Anyway, let's go on to the next section. When it comes down to Deku versus Shigaraki, I think the spectacles speak for themselves. It is beautifully animated and the fight is as intense as it should be. However, I like to make a note that Shigaraki, although nerfed in this one, his abnormality of just growing more skin is something to keep in mind, because that kind of helps him somewhat handle against Deku, who has like every single quirk on his disposal and is completely beating the ever-living fuck out of him. And there is a criticism I have heard about Deku that he is doing the same mistake he did in season 6 last season, where he let his emotions get the best of him, which nearly cost him One for All. And I do agree to an extent, because yes, Deku lost his mind when he saw Bakugo get, well, super hurt last season. However, I think he got better with that emotion. But when he saw his friend, who is dead at that point, and he definitely looks dead for sure, yeah, feelings be damned, because at that point, like, What do you want him to feel? Oh, nothing, because, oh, he might lose one for all if he loses his mind? Like, if you see your friend dead, I think that doesn't fucking matter at this point. You're going to lose your ever goddamn mind. Especially if it's someone who is, like, close. Yeah, obviously we have our thing with
Bakugo being such an ass to Deku at this point is kind of like, I mean, that's in the past though. They've kind of squalled it already, but I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about that Deku does value Bakugo. He's his best friend and childhood friend. Seeing his childhood friend in the ground, dead, kind of doesn't matter if he has to control his emotions, because seeing a close one dead essentially kind of just breaks a person enough, especially if they were super close. And I speak from experience, so in this one case, I understand Deku losing his mind and how it took Lemillion to literally calm him down and saying that they're trying to save him. And so aside from that being something I will defend, everything else I obviously said, it is amazing. Just watching them fight. Obviously Shigaraki's kind of nerfed here, while also not nerfed, but visually is amazing. Up until this next section,
the teleporting incident. Now, here's the thing about this. I'm still happy that Spinner won. That is not my problem. My problem with this is that it shifts the entire story so drastically that makes the final arc expand even more. And not only that, I didn't mention this, but Dabi still coming back and all his bullshit. I'll explain it in more of his second section, but some of the stuff was pre-BS. But at the same time, I kind of understand, because something like Toga using it and unable to properly use it would have been kind of a waste of a thing, I guess. But overall, it is one of the most annoying shits that happen. And as I said, the manga did it. It decided to do this. It completely shift the entire goddamn fight, and the anime follows it like perfectly, but it is one of the most annoying shits that I hate out of this entire thing, because now everything goes all over the damn place. If there's a feeling I have about this specific section, because it's going to coincide with the next section, is unlike with the whole racism quirk stuff that was definitely should have been its own arc, this alone also proves it should have not only been its own arc, but there should have been at the very least 2 episodes, because there is a lot of potential that was missed, or best said,
such wasted potential.
Because that is what this portion is. How do we get to wasted potential? Because we have Mina confronting her teacher's killer, not only revealing himself right at Mina, but also Mina's face of, I'm about to fuck you up kind of thing. And yet, that doesn't go too much, because all of this is, how did Gigancho Makia ended up in the All For One battlefield? So a lot of it is cut short, unfortunately, so this is wasted completely. Although we do get some badass Mina shots. I'm not gonna dismiss this girl's accomplishments and badass moments. And then we have Kirishima and Shinzo dealing with that villain from episode 1. And I think it was a cool callback, because Kirishima was already impressed by Deku, let alone more impressed when he found out he's the same kid that went running into danger. Which, I mean, it was a little nice little callback, and a nice way to just give them some issues, as well as Kirishima assisting Mina and all that. Like, the dude is awesome when he's on screen, so this gets points for this section. However, the thing comes down to Gigantomachia awakening and going off to, well, where All For One is, and Shinzo being there to essentially with Kirishima, but Shinzo's there to manipulate Makia. So I mean, that was the plan should he awaken, but I don't think I want to go too much into it, because this is going to go into the next section on how bloated it is. But the thing about this section I want to highlight the most is just, it is sort of rushed, unfortunately, and there was a lot of interesting things that could have been 2 episodes, similar to the whole racism arc, but the mini arc we get, but not the point. I think it's just wasted potential. Like, if you were to ask me, this is probably the second lowest point of the whole war arc, because so much things were potential here, and unfortunately it's just wasted due to literally time, and that goes back. It's the manga's fault, but how much can we say that before it's like, yeah, the story kinda is fumbling right now. Okay, now this section is where it's bloated because we are clearly going to first go over every single person versus All For One, and my godly, it is a bit insane kind of discussing this, but obviously Endeavor versus Dabi is more set to the side. But I did wanted to mention two specific students prior to this position where All For One is de-aging himself with Aries Quark. But first of all, Tokoyami and Jiro. Those two put themselves on the line and assisted Hawks in landing one hell of a blow. Not to mention, even though Jiro kind of definitely got injured, she still was a badass and kept going. Like, she was afraid. They all clearly see that All For One strikes fear upon his presence, and yet they weren't afraid of him, well, in the sense of they're gonna still keep fighting no matter what. And that's the cool thing about it. We get cool moments, and then obviously Gigantomachia coming in for the, oh no, All For One as a new ally that's literally the same power strength as him, and then suddenly gets literally attacked by him because Gigantomachia is more mad at All For One for abandoning him. And here's the problem, there's so many things going on, and then All For One just before All For One easily one-shots everyone and steal Hawks' quirk, Tokoyami with Shadow, like, using their true 100% potential was just brilliant. It was the greatest thing I've seen, and I was impressed. It was a great way of showing that they can definitely hold their own against the literal demon that's All For One. Or I guess Devil would fit him better. However, it comes down to the fact that none of these are the protagonists, so unfortunately, they all get one-shotted. And then Hawk's quirkless now has to deal with Toga's, rampage. And that's just the thing, is All For One is depicted as this intelligent person, and yet he's literally screwing around. It's not until he obviously is about to lose that he finally starts trying. And I don't know, that kind of annoys me, because smart characters don't tend to be knocked down like this. Like, they don't just screw around and taunt their enemies until they're literally put in a corner. Like, I don't know. It doesn't feel like the same energy as what it was when All For One was fighting All Might in Camino, because there he had all the cards literally stacked for him. Even though if All Might was putting up back a fight, he still had the advantage. It was just he was caught off guard by All Might's dodging maneuver. But I don't know. I feel like this section, like, it's good. Like, animation's always gonna be good, and there were some cool moments, but it feels weird that All For One would just be screwing around. Okay, so yes, I am at the Dabi defeat, and I have way too much to say on this for literally how already long this darn video is, but I will give some highlights. Dabi coming back and being a menace is both cool and uncool. It's cool in the sense of visually, because it is showing that this menace will not be defeated just yet. However, it's a little annoying because it completely undoes how impactful that literal shot of Kid Shoto defeating Kid Dabi, or Toya, I guess. And I don't know, that just feels so undermining, especially when it's like a few episodes away, where it's still kind of fresh in people's minds. But that's a side point. And then Dabi obviously now noticing that he's probably gonna die if he doesn't like go after Endeavor and get his revenge, goes after Endeavor because the incident teleporting thing managed to actually work and get him to Endeavor's position. And yes, Endeavor does not want to fight Dabi. Like, he legit doesn't want to fight his son, and it's understandable. I think that entire episode was with Endeavor, and I guess All Might's obviously is always cool, but Endeavor stuff was pretty interesting because we're seeing the growth of a terrible father, acknowledging his own mistakes, but as well as the fact that he is atoning for them, considering that in a partial sense he did create a Dabi. So having him try to self-sacrifice is an interesting thing, which forces the family, who happen to be close by and noticing that it is Dabi that's causing all the damage, quickly go and help Endeavor as well as prevent him from dying. And Shoto with Ida. The problem with this entire arc which I'll just point it in this section, Ida was not used at all. Considering all the development we've had with him, it's a little annoying that he is just there for a plot device of getting Shoto to the location of where Dabi ended up. And, I mean, it may have been cool and all, but I still find it very annoying that Ida kind of got done dirty. And that is a problem with this arc. It's just bloated to hell. But yeah, Shoto eventually does get there and is able to defeat his brother properly now with his family by his side, which is poetic. I will not doubt that. The Todoroki family finally together, finally stopped the rogue Todoroki and also like trying to save him, well, whatever's left of him. And yeah, I can't diss on that ending because it does put a nice bow and tie to the whole Todoroki storyline. It's just the problem comes down to the fact that it causes complications for other stuff, like how the hell did All For One not just murder every single one of the combatants without Endeavor's assistance, as well as the fact that Shoto defeating Dabi the first time would have been poetic within itself, because it has always been the destiny between the failure son and the perfect son, quote unquote, having a fight and the perfect son coming on top because he allowed his friends to open up himself from the darkness that his father gave him. You know, different things, but I will not complain on this. I'm mad that Dabi just does not want to die up until this point, or will get defeated. But I will not complain that this was still pretty cool, seeing the whole family together, having defeated their Dabi together. I will not diss on that. Okay, so we are getting to the end, I promise you. But let's go with Toga. And now, she obviously manages to get through the portal thanks to Kurogiri. And because of this, it allowed her to finally reach her target, Hawks, as well as pull off twice his ability of Sadman's Parade, which shows what would have happened if Hawks was unsuccessful in stopping twice before he pulled out his ultimate trump card. And it kind of shows because she kind of goes into every different section and causes so much shenanigans. It sort of helps Shigaraki finally go at full power. So we definitely had full power Shigaraki versus full power Deku, but that's a side point. And yeah, everyone kind of got screwed because of it. Now, it's clear that Toga is in distress. She doesn't want to be rejected. She's definitely mad and out lashing at everything, but deep down she wants to be cared. She wants someone to care for her, like how she kind of wants to love others as well. So this is all about emotions, which Ochaco fits well in this because she's trying to suppress her emotions. She clearly likes Deku. It is obvious throughout this entire series, and yet she suppresses those feelings in order for her to be a better hero. So having one that wants to express feelings versus one that suppresses feelings is an interesting one, especially when Toga in her past had to suppress her urges of wanting to drink blood. Though throughout this fight, of course, it's like interesting that Ochaco was able to spot which one of the twices was Toga. And honestly, I mean, she could have killed any of the heroes aside from Hawks, who she's actively trying to kill. She could have killed Ochaco, she could have killed Tsuyu, and yet she kind of was hesitating. It's almost like a part of her doesn't want to completely reject Ochaco, because she did love Ochaco, she did love Deku. Like, it's interesting on how, even then, with how Twice's quirk of being able to copy other quirks, like how she was trying to fully replicate his quirk, it didn't work, which I don't think that should even work per se, considering the power-up is you can use someone else's quirk. So I don't know, outside of that weirdness, it would have been too broken. Like, at this point, I think the author realized he probably made Toga way too overpowered, and the heroes have literally no chance if she had the ability of using the others' abilities, because then you would have a ton of Shigarakis, a ton of All For Ones, a ton of Dabis just running around and doing whatever the hell they want, and it turns into genuine chaos. Like, all of it is already chaotic, but this is literally the only time I can tell the author had to nerf the hell out of Toga. But it's still interesting that eventually, even with all the stab wounds that she inflicted on Ochaco was still desperate to reach that little girl that wants to be saved. similar to how Deku's trying to reach the little boy in Shigaraki to save him. But in this particular case, she was successful. Unfortunately for Ochaco, the injury she did receive that sort of put her on a lifeline of she's about to die, which Toga takes the opportunity to use Ochaco's blood to become Ochaco so that way she can do a transplant, even though this would kill her. And it's interesting that she does reflect that if things had been different, she probably would have used her quirk for good to this, like become people and help them like recover, so like a nurse kind of way. And it's an interesting way of seeing her quirk. But it's also interesting that this is the end of Toga. Yeah, she was a bad guy. I think we can acknowledge that she is the most sympathetic one, but we can't forget that she has done bad things. And this is more of a bittersweet end because although if she had survived, she probably would have just been doing like community service or, well, jail and community service, but getting rehabilitated back into society, not in the way like they tried to before, but in a better way. This felt more fitting for an end to her character because she got to live how she wanted. Whether it's good or bad, that's kind of irrelevant on this case, but it's more of just she died how she lived, being, well, Toga. And it's poetic. It's one of the strong parts of this final war arc. It's just the end of this character. Iron Might. Now, who would have thought about this? All Might, using technology, because he's quirkless right now, against All For One, the mastery of every single quirk because he's a little stealing little bitch. Anyway, not the point. The point on that is we need to backtrack. All For One clearly beat everyone. He's on his way to Shigaraki's location so he can do the final part to fully steal Shigaraki's body. And he has to be intercepted by someone. Shoto and Ida could, but All Might knows that Shoto needs to stop his brother. So he pulls out the suit in order to stop All For One. Now, clearly, this is reckless as hell. And, I mean, the author, like I said, he wrote himself into this position. So, I mean, literally anyone else, I don't know, a certain fire character could have been not busy with a different story arc, but whatever. Instead, we got a rematch again. The third battle between these two. And All Might is 2-0 at this point, so All For One needs to do something in order to fix this problem. And he's getting his ass handed to him. So I guess All For One is a joke now, because here's the thing. Obviously in the manga, it goes a little more into it, like the final war arc is incomplete. But I think it's baffling that All For One is getting pushed by so many heroes, which is interesting. And then the whole interior, his like quirks within him or rebelling, like so many different things are happening, but to still be like pushed into this degree is a little bit embarrassing because you're supposed to be the ultimate villain, the ultimate bad guy, and yet you are getting pushed, especially by a quirkless All Might. And I've told Lone Star Joker this: if All Might beats All For One, quirkless mind you, and for the third time, then yes, All For One is the biggest joke of all time. Because how does he lose not only to All Might 3 times, but a quirkless All Might? It would have been, oh my god, like that. It was where I think I had my contendants against the manga because I was like, are you serious? Is this really gonna happen kind of moment? We don't get a conclusion to this because that's gonna be next season, the true finale of My Hero Academia. But you gotta really put into perspective that it is a bit off that All For One is being pushed by Iron Might. And yeah, I love Iron Might. Like, I like the suit. I like the idea of him using his students' like abilities and having a spin on it. It is showing that All Might paid attention to his students and are using them as inspiration in order to fight back against All For One. It's like if they're there with him in a sense. And yeah, I mean, it's a spectacle battle. I am not going to deny that. I just think it's funnily absurd on how All For One is getting pushed by quirkless All Might. Now for the final section of this part, this very long part, and that is the whole setup for the grand finale of the series. And that is obviously Deku with One For All at full capacity versus Shigaraki with All For One at full capacity with no restrictions now. And a lot of this is, well, crazy because we have two powerhouses fighting with each other, so the animation goes hard. But I like to also bring up that all of Deku's good deeds, like Gentle Criminal as well as Lady Nagant, come in and help, and they really help him out in a way that he couldn't do on his own. With Gentle Criminal, he had to help keep UA from completely falling all the way towards Japan and causing destruction all around, as well as with Lady Nagant coming in and clutch to prevent Shigaraki from just disintegrating everything. So yeah, it's interesting because these two bought Deku enough time to halt Shigaraki and essentially be put in a fight to the death with both sides essentially clashing, and only one side can win this. Shigaraki's not going to back down, and Deku knows that if he has to try to reach Shigaraki, that's the only way. He has to bring the Tenko out of him if he wants to win. That is his win condition. While Shigaraki is literally destroy everything and killing Deku and stealing One For All, because apparently if you're an All For One user, you have the obsession of stealing One For All. So yes, a lot of crazy things happen, and this is essentially leading to the setup of their final clash alongside All Might versus All For One, the final battle between these two legends. And I gotta say, like, this is epic. Like, regardless of what I've said of obviously this final arc being bloated, which is why it isn't a good arc, this is still pretty epic to just be excited for a giant clash of monsters, essentially, because all of these guys are monsters on their own right, and I think this is the strongest suit. It's just, we want to see this Deku at his final potential versus Shigaraki at his final potential, showing us who is going to prevail, the hero or the villain. Finally, right? We finally reached to the conclusion. I feel so bad. I like, please like and subscribe. This took so long to do, but my godly, like, I had a lot to say on this whole section, but like, I'm gonna say this season had a lot happening all in one go, and that is the problem. It bloated so many things together, which knocks down this season what was last season I thought being the best up until that last episode. I think this season had a lot of good moments. However, due to the fact that the story feels like it's trying to do a ton of stuff all at once, it is kind of structured in a messy way. It's like a messy puzzle. Like, the pieces do fit, but the puzzle just doesn't look right because it's all a mess. And honestly, yeah, the manga's fault. I can blame the manga, can blame the writer, but I have to review it how the story was presented, and it was presented in a damn mess. However, despite this mess, it is a beautiful mess nonetheless.